Greetings and welcome to Voices Less Said podcast, season two. I'm so excited with the quality of conversations that I've had so far with our guests, and today is no different. Happy to introduce Kofi Achampong. Kofi was previously a consultant to the executive director of the International Lawyers and Economists Against Poverty in Toronto. And prior to launching his legal and consulting practice in 2018, Kofi was senior policy and stakeholder relations advisor to not one but three Ontario cabinet ministers. He was the lead advisor, for example, to the Minister of Government and Consumer Services on improving SME procurement, debt services legislation, as well as other endeavors as well. When I think of Kofi, I think of someone who wakes up each day to leave the world a better place, and in particular for Kofi, working to support the advancement of the welfare and well-being of Black communities, not only in Canada but around the world. Please join me as we have this conversation with Kofi Achampong. So you've had a busy morning. You were saying you're in court and stuff, eh?
Yeah. Had a just a very sort of minor administrative matter.
Okay.
A lot of just going to court to kind of select dates, figure out scheduling.
Yeah.
So yeah, not too hectic.
Awesome. I mean, you're always sharp every time, whether I meet you in person or online. You're always sharp, and I always feel underdressed meeting. It happens when you meet with lawyers, right? They always looking and playing the part.
Only on this day. You caught me on this day. Most days I'm pretty casual, so maybe this will be good for when this thing goes out. So you caught me on this day.
Yeah.
I'll just say that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I've done an intro, and my listeners already just know a little bit about who you are. But tell us a day in the life of Kofi. What does that look like? Can you just tell us again? What does a day in your life look like? I have so many questions for you, but maybe just to tell us, a bit more about you, Kofi.
Yeah, no. So a day in my life. Good question. So a day in my life really just looks like, getting up, getting three kids out the house to school, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and then sitting down, trying to figure out what I'm going to do that day, in terms of work, in terms of, what's needed at home, family wise, any extracurricular activities that I'm a part of. Any extracurricular meetings, events that I got to go to, just trying to be as productive as possible throughout the day. I'll tell you that it's a challenge to maintain consistency day in and day out. I think we all want to be working at a high level, and some days you don't work at the level you want. But that's what I'd say. I'm just trying to do my best to be working at that level.
Yeah. Oh, I feel you there, right? Sometimes I just wake up and I'm like, okay, today I'm not wearing any formal stuff. I'm just gonna put on a hoodie. I'm just gonna chill, because I lose the consistency sometimes. So I hear you.
Yeah, definitely. Consistency is hard, honestly, and I feel like it's a big. Once you figure out, I think who you are and what you need to have consistently positive, productive days, then you get kind of going, you get kind of rolling. So my challenge has always been trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? Okay, I have my espresso at this time, breakfast at this time. Do I need to do a little bit of, do I feel a little bit distracted? So I need to, I might do like a little 10-minute quiet meditation before I begin my day, which helps me a lot, to be quite honest with you. So I just spent a lot of time trying to figure out myself, so that I can be my best self every day and be productive every day,
That's awesome. And so many of the times that I've spoken with you, you've always given me some great insights about this grand question of life. And so I hear you again starting to talk about it a little bit. So for my listeners here who are trying to figure out who they are, what are pathways, what are potential ways, like how did Kofi get to be where he is, right? To be this amazing public affairs specialist, a lawyer, a government relations expert. Like, how did you get to find yourself, and how would one, what are the steps, what would one need to do? Is there science, is there mechanism that folks could look up that can help them on this path of becoming?
Yeah, great question, Patrick. I mean, I think it's a journey. Obviously, I think we're all kind of doing this constant, self discovery of ourselves. Trying to figure out who we really are, authentically. I think at some points in life, we're always reminded that we don't have much time. Our time is limited. And we all have things that we want to accomplish. And it's very easy to kind of fall into a lull, or to fall basically into someone else's path or goals and dreams, and just kind of go along with that. I say for me, it's been a combination of things. It's been, through my work. I had a chance to work in government for a number of years. Getting insight on what like decision making looks like from behind the scenes, right? From the seats of power at the political level. I had a chance, of course, to witness how ministers, government officials, how they interact amongst each other, the inner politics essentially of the political process here in Ontario in particular, and seeing how people position themselves effectively to advocate for the things that they care about, and to get the wins that they want, essentially. That taught me a lot. Also failures. I've had failures along the way, things that I haven't been successful in for various reasons along the way. Goals, objectives, things I thought I wanted to do, perhaps, and maybe didn't go the way I wanted, and so I've learned from that. I've done a lot of sort of self-reflecting, talking to people like yourself. We talk a lot about life, talk a lot about what we're trying to accomplish, being reflective along the way. What they say, the unexamined life is not worth living. Right. So being conscientious of just how finite and how limited our time is here. All of these things have kind of helped help me discover myself, and of course my involvement in community. I've always been someone who cares a lot about the communities I'm a part of. The African community, the Black community, the Muslim community. Communities that have grown up in low-income areas and environments here in Toronto, Canada. And understanding the needs and challenges of those communities. And then, of course, figuring out what my particular skill set is, what I'm good at along the way, and how that can be utilized to support those communities. All these things have kind of helped me figure out, what I am.
That's so good, and thank you so much for providing that, right? And so for listeners out there, as you try to find yourself, right? What are the things that are near and dear to your heart? What are you skilled at? What talents do you have, and who do you have around you to help you on this journey of finding yourself? One of the things, and I've been trying to shut it out, but I guess it's gonna come out because you have made reference to it, I think 3 times, if my count is correct, and just in this conversation, that we have limited time on this earth to do the things that we do. And so, I don't think my listeners have heard me in this way, just feeling so emotional this morning, because just an hour and a half ago, I got news that we just lost a brother out in South Africa, who I had worked with very, very closely the past 3 years. Someone who was so passionate about community development, and unfortunately, tragically lost his life this morning in an RTA, road traffic accident.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm reeling from that loss, because 2 things happened, right? Just yesterday, I was talking to one of my team members from my foundation out in Africa, and I was talking to them about this particular individual, saying, hey, now that they've resigned from this organization that they were a key partner, they were a funder, perhaps we could engage them and invite them to our board, because they bring a lot of insights and depth of knowledge. And to me, making a call to my brother and saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry, this has happened." He's like, "What has happened?" And I'm telling him, "Well, unfortunately, X has just passed away. I've just received this news. Have you heard it?" And both of us just started, crying on the phone. And so I mention this because of what you've mentioned 3 times, that we don't have in the time that we think we have on this earth, right? And so I reflected a lot about, why am I on earth? What am I doing? How am I living this place, a better world than I found it? And so, perfect segue into a couple of things that I wanted to discuss with you in terms of the work that you do. You do amazing advocacy work, as you mentioned, in the Black community, not just in Ontario, but I mean, you are working across this nation, across Canada. You're working in Africa. You're working in the US. You're having sort of ongoing engagements between Canada and Africa, helping with build out a business strategy. One of the things that I've heard you say over and over again is that part of the strategy, Patrick, I'm working on is not a win-lose strategy. Is how does Africa, with all the 54, 55 countries, how do they come to the table, to the negotiating table, and live with the wins, right? And how does also Canada, win in terms of that? So you're looking at it from that perspective. But you also speak about politics a lot, right? A lot of my political knowledge has been informed by your political positioning and your praxis. And then you also work around opportunities for Black communities in Canada with respect to business development and entrepreneurship. So starting with this last point, I know that there's been a Black class action lawsuit that you've been working on. Can you give us maybe some insights, without obviously going into the confidential details, et cetera, but just a high level, overview of this lawsuit? What does it mean for Black communities across Canada and for Canada in general? And what does it mean when you think of people of African descent in general?
Yeah, no, great question again, Patrick. So just the Black class action, I guess, just to sort of give some background on it. So in 2020, a class action was filed on behalf of Black Canadians who have either sought to be hired within the federal public service, or were hired within the federal public service and were never promoted, or were promoted at a rate that is differential, disproportionate, and discriminatory vis-a-vis other groups. This class action seeks to address essentially 50 years of discrimination in hiring and promotion of people of African descent, Black people in Canada, who, for one reason or another, want to work for the federal public service, are qualified, have merit, and are unable to achieve the opportunities to, go up in their careers, to find themselves being promoted into more senior roles. Something that is very common, across the board. You'll see it statistically that, in terms of representation, Black people, other people of color they have fair representation to some extent at the lower levels of government. Although there is evidence, of course, that there's also higher rates of discrimination and higher rates of falling off the applicant track when it comes to hiring itself. So there is some, notwithstanding the fact that there's representation at the lower levels, there is evidence that at some point, at some level, there's an experience that is very unique to Black people when it comes to applying for jobs within the federal public service. This lawsuit was spearheaded by a young man named Nicholas Marcus Thompson, a former CRA employee, who had applied for promotion opportunities, jobs within the federal public service, believed himself to be quite qualified, had met the various job criteria, and wasn't finding himself gaining opportunities, whilst witnessing other colleagues of his, non-Black colleagues
rising
of his,
through the
rising through the ranks, which is a very common story, very common narrative. And of course, he had come in contact with other people as well who experienced the same thing at the CRA. Black people who had been there for decades, who had sought, gone back to school, did retraining, sought opportunities to gain acting leadership roles, weren't given those opportunities. And this is important because, that's what facilitates training. That's what facilitates accreditation. you have to be intentionally set up in a way in the public service to obtain promotion opportunities. And the record seems to indicate that Black people were not finding these opportunities. So he and some other plaintiffs, essentially, who had very similar experiences across departments, across ministries, or in the public service, decided to come together and to say, we want to launch a lawsuit. The major challenges has been essentially that there exists a process in place for someone. If you're not hired, if you're not promoted, there exist certain processes in place. You might go to Human Rights Commission. You believe that you were discriminated against. The problem with the Canadian Human Rights Commission is that it has a disproportionately high rate of dismissal of race-based complaints in particular having to do with anti-Black racism that it itself has acknowledged. Moreover, the Treasury Board Secretariat has an administrative body that a complaint can essentially be brought to. And employees of the Human Rights Commission have actually brought the commission itself in front of this body with the support of a few other unions. And it's been found, essentially, that, in fact, the Human Rights Commission in Canada was discriminating against its own Black employees, and was discriminating against applications that had to do with anti-Black racism. So we have a Human Rights Commission who typically you would go to if you had been discriminated against at the federal level, because of some prohibited grounds, such as race, that you would seek justice from. Problems that commission itself wasn't doing its job and hasn't been doing its job. Moreover, that commission itself should have been leading some of the studies, looking at some of these reports to assess whether or not Black people were properly represented in the federal public service over these years, and it hasn't been doing that. So that's one end of it. The other end of it, of course, is that there are unions. There are unions in place. There's a grievance process in place. The problem is that the grievance processes don't typically or don't deal with hiring and promotion. Collective bargaining agreements are intentionally meant to regulate existing relationships in a particular type of way, but not to determine hiring and promotion policies and processes. There's some debate right now in the jurisprudence about what this ultimately means, but in effect that means that there's no systemic way of addressing this kind of thing across the board for Black people. So this class action,
No, right. So what is the class action seeking to do then? To compel the Canadian Human Rights Commission or compel the PM's office to do something? What's the outcome that's expected from this?
Yeah, so there's a few things we're trying to do with the class action. So one of the things that we've done basically is there's an international body that oversees national and that accredits national human rights commissions around the world. Okay.
This is a UN agency?
It's a UN affiliated or not-for-profit that basically accredits and gives basically A status or B status to different countries. What we've done as part of the class action, separate from the class action but relating to it in many ways, is to bring a complaint to have Canada's status reviewed, and that body has agreed, based on the preliminary evidence and information that's been provided to it, to review Canada's status. Right. Again, this is a major signal that Canada at a Human Rights Commission level, federally, is not meeting global standards in terms of what would be expected of human rights body. So that's one element of it. The other element of it is that, of course, we have one of the strategies we've asked for is that we've asked just directly in the class action itself for an amendment to the Employment Equity Act. The Employment Equity Act is remedial legislation that is meant to basically address inequitable outcomes and processes for designated groups under the Act. Women, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and visible minorities, right? The challenge, of course, with the Employment Equity Act, however, is that it doesn't disaggregate visible minorities. So Black people were all kind of grouped into this visible minority category. And the challenge with that is that because it doesn't disaggregate this, groups, you as a federal employer, you as a federal contractor, who is subject to the Employment Equity Act can be seen to be technically meeting these labor market sort of standards and expectations.
But you're not still addressing some other groups that are not, ordinarily getting
Exactly.
opportunities. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
I see.
So then the legislation itself becomes a form of adverse discrimination.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's hiding real discrimination.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what a lot of times policy is. Policies are put into place which ostensibly look like they're resolving something, but they're actually hiding a greater issue that needs to be addressed. And so the class action seeks to address that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's interesting, right? So I think about sort of systemic issues, right? And so let's step back a little bit, and I want to hear your take with what's happening across, next door. I call it across the ocean or across the river from here. What's happening in the US, right? We've got a new president elected, and part of the mantra with the team around him is this EDI should go out through the bin. We should go through the window into the bin, right? And so how much of that is going to destroy or maybe perhaps weaken some of the advances that you've made in Canada, for example, in terms of seeking just equity, seeking opportunities for people of color, for Black people, for example, to get how much of what's going on next door in the rhetoric that surrounds all of that is impeding some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think it's a reality that I think anyone who's doing work in this area is very much aware of. There's a general sense that EDI conversations around diversity and inclusion are all kind of woke nonsense, right? This is this is getting in the way of actual business. This is getting in the way of actually having good systems, good economies, good products. That people are no longer being hired and giving opportunity because of merit, but they're being given opportunity because we're trying to meet some sort of woke objective, some false rainbow nation type of ideal, which has as its ultimate effect that white people are discriminated against, right? In Canada and North America, the dominant people who are in power in places of relevance have been historically white Europeans. So there's this notion really that all this DEI work that comes on the heels of the Black Lives Matter movement, the murder of George Floyd, right? All the Stop Asian Hate, right? Rhetoric around Islamophobia, all of these things, even anti-women, rhetoric, anti-immigration rhetoric, anti-South Asian immigration rhetoric. So all of these things are seen as guilt traps that lead to responses that require DEI as a solution. And so naturally, what we're having now is a pushback to a lot of this work. Now it's very concerning in Canada, because people think that Canada might be absolved from this, which is not the case whatsoever. In Canada, we're seeing evidence that things are not moving as quickly as possible. On the heels of the class action, the Privy Council office, which is the highest bureaucratic office, which essentially is the organizing central body of the bureaucracy of the federal government, the Secretary of Cabinet there, who is considered the highest civil servant in the country, issued what's called a call to action, which essentially said to department heads and to directors across the federal public service, you must hire, sponsor, find people of color, Black people, Indigenous people. For too long have we tolerated an environment where we haven't allowed people to have opportunities, where we haven't given access to people from these groups. It was specifically stated that the federal government public service was going to make this intention to find and bring Black people and other racialized people into positions of leadership. And that this was going to be seen as a part of the mandate and expectations across departments and ministries. It led to the creation of various DEI-related committees and mandate letters, or mandates rather, for senior civil public servants rather, to ensure that this was part of how they were meeting their targets. It became part of their KPIs essentially. But of course we also saw the government itself move towards creating a task force that reviewed the Employment Equity Act, actually,
Yep.
which ultimately came back with a recommendation that the government needed to create separate and distinct categories for
Yep.
Black people and
Okay.
2F LGBTQ people.
Yep.
Right? Again, an outcome of the class action in many ways, which had been calling for the creation of a separate category for Black people quite directly. The government said, they took the task force's report. Big shout out to Professor Adele Blackett at McGill University, who led that particular task force in the report. And the government said basically they accepted the findings and that they would be moving towards this, but they haven't done it just yet.
Yeah. So Kofi's work is to really sort of hold the government to account, right?
100%.
Is to say, okay, why are you not doing this? The task force, you've accepted these recommendations. Why are you not doing it? And so this class action becomes a way of putting their feet to the fire. Is it right?
100%. It's definitely one of the ways that we're putting the feet to the fire, and also essentially, it's an opportunity for the government to give a kind of reparatory justice to Black people who have suffered years of discrimination. In effect, you've acknowledged that anti-Black racism. This is the Prime Minister acknowledging that anti-Black racism, systemic discrimination are realities, are facts, right? That for too long, Black people have dealt with, right? You saw the Prime Minister George Floyd make these kind of statements, take a knee, do all these things that are quite good and symbolic in many ways. And I want to give credit where credit's due. This government has done a lot for Black Canadian communities. They just come out with a Black Justice Strategy. Yes. They came out with a Black Entrepreneurship Program. They're coming out with the lending program. They've come out with an endowment fund. They've done a lot for Black communities. They've addressed issues around mandatory minimums. But there's still challenges in terms of the delivery of some of these policies and legislations. So which are an issue.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, and that's important, right? And I just didn't want to just gloss over some of the work that you have done, right, in terms of some of these, government-led, federal government-led initiatives, right? And so I know a couple of years ago, you and others took the lead in lobbying the government to create this endowment fund to support Black communities across Canada. And so tell us a little bit of the backstory to that, right, and your involvement in that. And so to my listeners, like I said, my podcast really speaks to ordinary people doing extraordinary work. And again, Kofi is such an extraordinary person who's doing amazing work in Canada at amazing and incredible tables. Like you're sitting at these tables where you have these high stakes conversations as to relating to the lives of not just Black Canadians, but all Canadians. And so speak to us a little bit about the Black-led Endowment Fund and your role and what you did to get that to actualization. And so folks, the Black-led Endowment Fund was a $200 billion endowment fund that was introduced 2 years ago last year, actually, in 2024, by 2023 by the federal government. And this was just to give money to Black communities through a grant making process that is now led by the Foundation for Black Communities. So tell us, what was your role in that process in establishing this endowment fund?
Yeah, no, great question. So there are a lot of people who have been responsible for creating the endowment fund. So this conversation around creating an endowment fund, in terms of my understanding of it, at first it was brought to the government's attention by Jean Augustine. Okay, this was on the heels of the, if you'll recall, there was an unfortunate incident years ago when the Prime Minister was found to have painted himself, black, and was essentially wearing blackface. When he was a bit younger. So at the time, I had just stopped working with the provincial government, the provincial Liberals, and I started my own sort of legal practice and government relations practice. I was a stakeholder around many tables around diversity, equity, and inclusion, around what the needs of the Black community are. I was invited to a meeting with some well-known sort of Black leaders and Liberals to discuss essentially what we could do, what the Prime Minister could do to sort of redress some of the harm that people were feeling, and pain and hurt and disrespect maybe that people were feeling at the time. So I was part of a conversation where a number of initiatives, a number of ideas were put forward. We met with the Prime Minister and some of his senior ministers, and we discussed things that we would love to see the Prime Minister respond with as a real form of making amends. Right? We didn't want to just see words. We wanted him to say, "Hey, listen, I understand the pain this has done to your community. I understand how it reinforces negative stereotypes, uh, negative ideas and thoughts that harm your community and that affect you in real life, right? That affect you when you go out and get a loan, when you go out and seek a grant, when you go out and walk the street and worry about criminalization, right? So we wanted to see a few changes, and so under the leadership of Jean Augustine, we essentially put forward a few ideas, including the creation of an endowment fund. Jean Augustine, she was the former minister of multiculturalism under Jean Chrétien many years ago. I think Canada's first ever Black federal minister, responsible in many ways for helping us get Black History Month in this country. She had the experience of witnessing how the Canadian Race Relations Foundation had been formed as part of an apology to Japanese Canadians who had been interned, who have been discriminated against in Canada, and a fund that had been created to kind of support their community in response. And she thought this idea was apropos of what we could be putting forward to the Black for the Black community as well. So following that meeting with the Prime Minister, we put forward a document. We shared some ideas. Some of those ideas came to fruition, including a 5% procurement pilot for Black businesses, addressing issues of mandatory minimums, addressing hiring in the federal public service. Right. So this was an issue that we were well aware of even before the Black Class Action was brought to bear. So unfortunately, nothing was really sort of done other than maybe like a couple emails. Nobody really pushed it. A couple months later, this would have been around maybe April or May 2020. Following the tragic killing and murder of lynching really of George Floyd. I got a call from my friend Liban Abukor, who had been working in sort of the grant making community for a long time here in Toronto. He had his own not-for-profit, and he had experience of what it meant to basically not have enough funding, the insecurity of funding that Black nonprofits and charities were facing. And so he said, listen, I have this idea to go to the government and essentially ask them to create an endowment fund. And I said, oh, that's great. I think this is something that Jean Augustine had discussed and we talked about and didn't go anywhere. Nobody really took the bull by the horns.
Bull by the horns,
Yeah, and and really drove it. But he had the idea, he had the vision. He understood why the amounts that initially we had put forward, maybe $30-40 million, was insufficient. And so he started to work on that with me at the time, because I was at many of these stakeholder tables, in discussions with the Black community. I had a chance to kind of share this idea very early on and to say, hey, listen, a friend of mine, Liban Abukor, he's a executive director of a not-for-profit. He sits on various foundations. This is his idea. We start talking about it and started sort of discussing it with different folks in government that I knew. And eventually, he put together a concept note. We submitted that, and that started to sort of get the conversations going. One very helpful thing I'd say very early on that was very useful was part of a stock take that I had a chance to be part of around that time. This is again, post George Floyd, post COVID, right? The government is trying to respond to the shutdown of the economy, essentially, the fears that minority communities might be, worse off, doubly impacted in many ways. And I was invited to a stock take, basically, to sort of give advice to the government. Where the Prime Minister, the Deputy Minister, Ministers of Finance, many senior officials, the Secretary of the Cabinet, were listening to essentially people in the community to come who they could kind of sort of share their experiences. What are you seeing out there? Essentially, the government is trying to seek feedback from people who they know are kind of engaged
at various levels within the community.
At various levels, So, this was probably only a few weeks after I had spoken to Liban at the time. And, I made sure to mention that, alongside a few of the ideas that I put forward, that, hey, there's this idea of creating an endowment fund that we need to really look at. That this is something that a friend of mine has put forward, and I shared this idea, and this is something that government needs to really take seriously as they're responding to the impacts and effects of COVID on the Black community. Fast forward from there, Liban and went to go form a team of other people who basically came together. Some of them from the Calgary Foundation, some of them who were in the foundation world as well, some of them community organizations as well, and they started working together as a group
to turn this idea into a more substantial proposal.
Proposal, exactly. And so from there, that's where basically the idea of this Blacklight Endowment Fund was concretized and developed, and the creation of a new foundation was put forward. I was not involved necessarily in the day-to-day of that, because I was kind of a strategic advisor. Also, kind of like strategically kind of kept away in some ways because I was also someone who was also formally sort of recently been working with the government, and we were very conscious, I think, of my role in a sense. But I was able to kind of be someone who was involved throughout the process. But really, that Liban, I want to give a shout out to Joseph, Rebecca, Jacka. They were the individuals who really drove the ship there and helped put together some of these ideas along the way. I also managed to contribute by suggesting that they do a study.
Which became the unfunded report, right?
Yeah, unfunded report. Yeah, this was an interesting conversation. Liban and I had. They were doing great work, and I said, listen, I've worked with these liberals, man. They always need something. They need some data. They're data-driven people. They're not like conservatives who are like, no, we know this, let's go do it. They always want to justify what they're doing through some report. They'll have millions of reports, but I know that it will help make it easier. And of course, they're always worried that they're going to get this backlash that you're supporting minorities too much, you're supporting DEI too much, right? So
where's the data? Where's the evidence?
Where's the data, right? So if you give it to them, then they can make the case, and it's hard to argue with certain types of data. So that report helped, spur a lot of the government sort of confirmation and movement that, oh wow, this is really an issue. This is not just my own opinion or Liban's opinion or Rebecca's opinion or Jack. Like, it was really evidenced by
it was grounded in evidence.
Yeah, and again. This was Liban took this idea. He went to Carleton University. He was a professor there. He knew very well. He worked with him, and he got some support as well from Emmanuel Melez at Network for Advancement of Black Communities. And I think they put forward, they found some researchers, and that report was groundbreaking in many ways and helped bring a lot of people's attentions and eyes to the real challenges of the Black community.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And then, I mean, as you point out all of this, as you provide this narration, one of the things that stand out for me as a historian, but also as someone who's grounded so much in my culture, is this notion of we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, we stand on the shoulders of our elders. And so without Jean Augustine having started this conversation in community, both even with the federal government, perhaps we wouldn't have been where we are now. Right, that there's a federally recognized or issued in endowment fund, and so just really shout out to our elders and those that have gone before us, particularly in the black community, that have had tough conversations, that have fought for rights, that have fought for so many things that we enjoy now. Even though we continue with the certain struggles, they ran their race and handed over the baton to us, and so kudos to our leaders and our elders.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I turn now, and as we sort of wind up our conversation, to sort of the Canada-Africa strategy. I know you've been doing some work with folks in Ghana. You've been, doing work with folks in South Africa, in Nigeria as well. There's a project that you're working on. High level, what does that look like? What is the impact of that work on Canada at a national level, and what is the impact perhaps on Canada-Africa relations in business?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. No, I mean, this is important because we're so what's interesting. I mean, I've been in this country for 35, 36 years. And I've seen the demographic shifts. In this country, right? This country in the 60s, 70s. The Black people are, a lot of Caribbean people are coming up here, finding healthcare related work, domestic related work. Of course, we have our Indigenous African Canadian communities in Ontario, in Alberta, in Nova Scotia, but we see an influx of Black people from the Caribbean, over these years. And then, in the 80s, 90s, new incursions. In the 2000s, I've seen, more Black people coming from the continent, right? So a lot of continental Africans have come into Canada now. And we're seeing these natural connections between the continent and Canada form more so as these groups kind of become more established as well. Canada, for many, many years, has never conscientiously engaged Africa. And this is something that's just been known. Anybody who studied, African studies that, followed Canada-Africa relations in school. I did part of my undergraduate studies focusing on Pan-Africanism, the African Union, Canada-Africa relationships. I got a chance.
And I know you did an internship at the African Union, right? In Addis Ababa at some point, and then you went to the UN in Switzerland. I think you did some work there too, right?
Yeah. So I went to the WTO in Switzerland, where I worked with the Africa group as well. So I was able to see kind of like where Canada comes up in conversation. I mean, we have a great reputation among many people in these multilateral settings. Canada has a great reputation. Canada's reputation in Africa, for the most part, there are things that are not great that most people don't know, but for the most part, Canada has a pretty good reputation in.
Like what? Tell me something about what people might not know about Canada's bad reputation or bad rep in Africa.
Well, people might not know that Canada was involved in some of the sort of behind the scenes work that ousted Kwame Nkrumah. Canada was behind the scenes work that ousted Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of Congo. People might not know that Canada for a long time was very much supportive of the South African apartheid regime. In fact, it was people were really surprised that it was the conservatives, right, at the time that basically upended Canada's support or, in effect, lack of concern for the indigenous African populations in South Africa, right? People were surprised that, I think it was Brian Mulroney who really made the attempt. He's a conservative who put Canada's values at the forefront of changing the relationship between Canada and apartheid South Africa. Even Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who's considered one of the most progressive leaders in our country, who's a father of multiculturalism in some ways. He didn't really sort of demonstrate real concern or care for
what was going on in South Africa.
What's going on there as well, right? And of course Canada has had experience. Many of Canada's mining operations in Canada and Africa have been exploitative. Canada has reinforced lots of sort of patrimonial and neo-patrimonial relationships and issues and problems in the continent. So, Canada has not always, been this kind of soft, nice, kind country that we portray ourselves in. We've had some malicious kind of foreign policy approaches, and in fact, I think this is something that we have to be very cognizant of, right? That there are different faces of Canada. In terms of how they're engaged in the continent. But nevertheless, we do have other things. Canada has been, very supportive when it comes to like overseas development assistance. Canada is known to support lots of, gender-related supports and programs
through the Fiat.
So we have some positive experience and reputation on the continent. But we've never really looked at the continent as a place where we could really sort of do business, be equitable partners, support Africa in its seeking to address inequity, global inequity, its economic development, political development in various ways. Although Canada, like I should mention that we helped found UN Economic Commission of Africa's Policy and Trade Division. We've given support to that. We're supporting the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat. we do positive things as well.
So
I don't want to.
okay.
Yeah.
So there are quite a number of positive things that are going on, right?
Yeah.
And so now what you're trying to do now is to weave the thread, right? In terms of you've seen this influx of people coming in, from Africa, and so saying, hey, well, how do we take advantage of this opportunity? Like, how do we, create win-win business? And so how far are you in that? And are you seeing any light at the end of the tunnel between, Canada and Africa?
So to me, that's the perspective I'm taking, right? Of course, for Canadian officials, it's there's a geopolitical sort of race and battle happening here for Africa's resources, right? As critical minerals become relevant to these sort of like green energy revolutions that we're
the
having
green energy revolution. I was about to say that.
Right. So we're and Africa has a critical role to play in that. Right. It's a super endowed continent, very rich in these minerals and resources, and Canada, of course, wants to ensure that they have a hold in that. Right. Canada has the most mining firms, mining companies in the continent, right? Canada is a mining. Go ahead.
I think one of the largest platinum mining companies is platinum or lithium too in Zimbabwe is a Canadian company.
Yeah.
Caledonia Mining. I think that's the name. Yeah. Interesting.
And many people don't know, right? And there are all these mining towns and the continent that essentially this is the experience of that we have Africans with many of these Canadian corporations and companies, right? They are there to extract, and they might create these mining towns. My father grew up kind of like in a gold mining town, in central Ghana, and they would. They become like their own entities and own worlds, right?
Sure.
So they've had an effect and impact on, but they haven't. The engagement hasn't always been well structured. Sometimes it's been coupled with very exploitative contracts, very bad loans, right? Now we're in a period in which we're kind of going through this sort of new technological revolution. Young people are driving a lot of the these new sort of technological solutions, making the world much, much smaller. And many of them are coming from the African continent. Africa's full of talent, and many of them are coming to Canada. This kind of push and pull thing that's happening, right? Like, there are so many issues and challenges with developing, your product and having business opportunities, having financing on the continent. So you're pulled to, somewhere like Canada or the UK or France or the US, and your talent lands here. But you also have this knowledge of the continent and what its needs are, right? So we're seeing this influx. For me, I've seen a great influx in Toronto in particular of African talent. That comes here and young talent, that wants to find a way to tap into the African market. This is a huge market. Right?
It is,
huge market. There's all this potential. And here we are sitting in Canada, not really engaging, still thinking about these traditional sort of industries that are extractive, that are sometimes exploitative and undermine, African economic development and sovereignty in many ways. And so my goal, has been for many years to try and get our government to sort of develop something, engage more proactively, more holistically, more sincerely, more judiciously. I've been lobbying again, like 2018, 2019, Canadian officials, to kind of do something about our Canada-Africa relationship. Not just me, other people have been doing this again, before me as well. Shout out to Professor Thomas Tieku at Western Ontario. We've had many people doing this kind of work for decades, and not finding a real response. Come 2020, though, Canada is seeking a UN Security Council seat. These temporary rotating seats.
Yes.
And in order for Canada to win, Canada has to get the African countries to support. But they're up against countries like Norway, right? Germany, I think. I'm not sure if Germany was the time. I think maybe Norway was one of our big competitor. And Norway, a small country like Canada, is very active on the continent. Right? Very deliberate about trying to engage Africa. right?
Yeah.
Across different platforms, across different, streams,
Sectors as well. Yep.
sectors, exactly.
Yeah.
And, but we recognized the opportunity. All of a sudden, the prime minister, other ministers flew out to the African Union in Ethiopia to make these, have these meetings, etc.
Yeah.
But what was very clear is that it was kind of really on the heels of Canada seeking this rotating Security Council seat. So it wasn't genuine in some sense. And Africans knew that. Okay, Canada, now you're showing up. People have been calling on the prime minister on your, to come to Africa, to make Africa fight. Now you're engaging us, right?
Because
so from there, now, maybe necessity is the mother of invention. They say.
Yeah.
So now that we recognize Africa is really relevant, becoming relevant, important more geopolitically, Canada wants to sit at these tables. Then we started to sort of engage more deliberately, not just letting our mining companies go there, bringing our prime minister there, bringing our minister do more business and trade missions there. And so essentially that was what kind of spurred Canada's renewed engagement. The Business Council of Canada put together a report called Why Africa. I encourage listeners to go check out that report called Why Africa. It's a 2019, 2019 or 2020 report that really lays out the case for why Canada is underperforming in terms of its engagement with Africa. There are places in Africa that are growing economically that we could do more business with, that India is doing more business with, that China is doing more business with, and that are primed to become hotspots for economic engagement over the years. And so that essentially laid the case and the groundwork for what's called what was to become the Africa strategy, which is something that I'm told has just been basically finally completed and will be announced by the federal government next year, probably in January or February.
Wow, what a lot of work that you've been involved in. And I know also in my own small corner, I've also been working with the university here, University of Victoria, right, to try and also create, because again, it's an academia too, right? There's so many opportunities of, learning and partnerships with the African continent and, working with, the global engagement group at the University of Victoria to develop an Africa strategy that helps not to center Canadian knowledge, but to say, hey, what is it that we can learn from Africa and how can we, apply that in our context. So Kofi, you are such an amazing individual, amazing friend, brother. You are doing quite a lot of work. You are such a repository of knowledge. Thank you for the work that you do. I would love to invite you again. As these initiatives that you're working on come to fruition, I would love to bring you onto the podcast again and have this conversation. Last question. I mean, when we started off and we were having our conversation, even before we started, recording, you're like, yeah, I just wake up and I see what I need to do. Nah, man, brother, you don't wake up and see. There's so many layers of complexities of the work that you do, but yet still find time to pick up a phone to hear my, nonsense, or, we pick up a phone and we chat about different stuff. You're just an amazing, amazing individual, Kofi. And I just don't say this for this show or anything, but truly from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being you, and thank you for the work that you continue to do. Sometimes, we talk about, and I talk about, the struggle is not televised. The work that you do many a time might not be making, headlines on CBC, on, global news or whatever, but you're doing groundbreaking work that is changing the lives of people here in Canada for the better. And so thank you. Receive this with really, really a grateful heart, from a grateful heart. Thank you so much for the work you do.
Likewise, and you too, Patrick. I think I met you, as doing the engaging with the FFDC, the Foundation Endowment Fund, and right away your authenticity, your sincerity, your deliberateness, your skill, is felt, and I think you're what you're doing is incredible. You have a big impact on this country, and you have a lot to offer this country through your skill and experience and your relationships, your connections, your insights. We have tremendous talent in this community, and people like yourself, definitely need to also get their flowers as well for the impact that you're making, in your work. So it's an honor. It's been my honor, honestly, to meet you. I've spoken about you to many people. Because I genuinely think that you are who you say you are, and you are someone who has reflected upon life and purpose, and lives with intention, and that what you do and how you do it really matters. And I think that that's to be felt by anybody who gets to engage with you and benefit from your experience.
Thank you so much, Kofi. You get me all emotionally tangled up. Thank you so much, brother. Listeners, this is Voices Less Said podcast with Dr. PMak, where I speak with ordinary people doing extraordinary conversation. And Kofi, thank you so much again for being a part of this conversation today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Voices Less Said podcast with Dr. PMak. I hope you enjoyed insights that came out of this conversation. Keep your notifications on. Our next episode will be dropping soon. Thank you and enjoy.